chosen ones. They lied to you about the 8th gate, not because they didn't believe in it, but because they feared what would happen if you ever crossed it. While others were being told to chase wealth, comfort, and control, you were born encoded with a map, an ancient trajectory aimed directly at the one place humanity was never meant to enter, the Forbidden Zone. Every spiritual text hints at it. Every empire erased the records, and every secret society built layers of deception to bury it further. But it didn't matter, because your frequency began breaking through before you even knew the locks existed. The first 7 gates were tests, designed to bend your will, fracture your memory, and confuse your purpose. But the 8th, it wasn't built to test you, it was built to contain you. The zone is not a place in the way they've taught you to perceive locations. It's a boundary of consciousness, stitched into the fabric of time itself. You weren't supposed to remember it, but here you are, dreaming about realms that shouldn't exist, hearing callings no one else hears, feeling doors open in your sleep. This is no accident. The ancients whispered of a generation that would emerge encoded with a celestial anomaly. They called you the Pathbreakers, the Veil Burners, the Last Remembrance. And deep in the forbidden scriptures, locked beneath Vatican vaults and off-world archives, there's a single recurring phrase: when the 8th is opened, the blood-born flame shall return, and time shall weep. That flame is you. You're not crazy for sensing the lies. You're not broken for not fitting in. You are, and always have been, the anomaly that resets the program. But understand this: crossing into the Forbidden Zone is not about physical movement. It's about activating a memory that was quarantined by design. Your soul carries fragments of a place untouched by decay, illusion, or fear. But the journey ahead won't be easy. They will try everything to keep you from what comes next. Because beyond that final gate is something they could never control. For centuries, the idea of the gates was dismissed as spiritual metaphor, poetic language used by mystics to describe inner ascension. But that's exactly what they wanted you to believe. The truth was far more dangerous. These gates were not symbolic. They were constructed, encoded, and enforced by ancient forces who understood the threat of an awakened soul. The first gate tested your sense of identity. The second fractured your perception of time, each one more intricate, more concealed, more embedded in the layers of your psyche and cellular memory. But it was the 8th, the final gate. They sealed with blood rituals and dimensional locks, terrified of what it would release. It was never about keeping others out. It was always about keeping you in. Long before any religion or government existed, the architects of this seal encoded it in forgotten languages and energetic codes. Civilizations that discovered it were destroyed within a generation. Cultures that built around it were hijacked and turned into distractions. The final gate resides on the threshold between mind and cosmos, a realm few dare to access and fewer survive after touching. To even approach it requires the breakdown of every illusion you've been taught to love. That's why they feed you comfort. That's why they offer you titles, validation, small powers. It's all a bribe to keep you from remembering the architecture of your own imprisonment. But something changed the moment you started rejecting the script. Subtle shifts in reality began to intensify. The people around you couldn't understand. Time started behaving differently. You'd see things before they happened. You'd wake up with dreams that felt more real than your day-to-day life. And worst of all, for them, you stopped being afraid. They knew if even one of you passed through, the seal would begin to crack. Because you're not just a person, you're a carrier, a living breach, a walking paradox that cannot be contained within the simulation they've built. And now, the energy is responding to your awakening. The gate is vibrating again. Frequencies long dormant are beginning to hum in the walls of your own consciousness. The eighth frequency wasn't erased because it was weak. It was hidden because it was incorruptible. In a world addicted to distortion, such purity was a threat to every system of control. The 7 frequencies beneath it were fragmented, distorted, re-engineered to loop endlessly. They gave birth to hierarchies, fear, worship, war. But the 8th? It was the tone of liberation, the sound of divine memory. And those who vibrated near it would begin to awaken truths that collapse the illusion of time itself. Long ago, those entrusted with the guardianship of this realm, once aligned with divine source, fell into temptation. They discovered the power of inversion, to mimic the light, to mimic truth, to offer reflections of freedom that were actually prisons. They needed the masses bound in loops, unaware of the real thresholds buried beneath layers of ritual and doctrine. The moment a soul reached for the 8th, the programmed frequencies would activate. Anxiety, confusion, exhaustion. Most would turn back. That was the design. But you didn't turn back, because something inside you kept singing, not from the mind, not from the body, but from a deeper place. The 8th frequency doesn't shout. It resonates. It hums in the quiet moments between decisions. It glows in the silence when all logic has failed. And when you hear it, truly hear it, it's as if your whole being reorients, like a lost star finding its original orbit. Even the ancients who documented this frequency knew it could not be taught, only remembered. They inscribed it in sacred geometry, encoded it in chants, buried it in parables, and in one such fragment, long thought lost, is written, "He who walked among the broken stones hummed the 8th into the hearts of men." His name was forgotten by kings, but echoed in the caves of the faithful. They were speaking of Yeshua, not as a figure of worship, but as a carrier of the tone. He embodied the vibration they feared most, the reminder that the kingdom was not out there, but within. And now, you're starting to feel it, aren't you? Not a song, not a word, but a pulse, a return, a doorway forming in the silence. They've told you that you're flawed, that something about you is unstable, too sensitive, too intense. But they weren't describing a weakness. They were identifying a threat. What they sensed, even if they didn't consciously know it, was the dormant code embedded in your soul before your birth. A fragment of light too ancient for this world to digest. The forbidden code was not installed by accident. It was smuggled in, hidden in your DNA, buried beneath the noise of programming and generational trauma. And from the moment you arrived, they began testing your stability. The world around you was calibrated to suppress that code. Television, chemicals, frequencies, belief systems. Not to kill you, but to neutralize you. You weren't meant to awaken. The idea was that by the time you were old enough to remember, you'd already be too entangled in distractions to ever notice. But the code didn't come here to sleep forever. It was timed, calibrated to the pulse of the Great Shift. And when that signal reached the edges of your subconscious, it began its slow ignition. You started questioning things others took as fact, not out of rebellion, but out of an ancient knowing. You felt things before they happened. You saw patterns in the chaos. The people around you called it imagination, madness, delusion. But you were decoding the illusion in real time. Every dream, every synchronicity, every moment of déjà vu was the code activating itself. And though you doubted, though you struggled, you never fully shut it down. They don't fear your ideas, they fear your alignment. Because once that code reaches full resonance, you're no longer functioning within their system, you're overriding it. You begin transmitting a signal that disrupts the simulation around you. People change near you. Structures collapse. Falsehoods get exposed. It's not that you destroy, it's that you reveal. You've likely felt the pressure increasing, like something is pushing up from beneath your reality, distorting everything. That pressure is the code breaking through the final membrane. It knows where it came from. It remembers why it was sent. And as it accelerates, so do the attempts to stop you. They were not kings, they were not priests, they were not the gods you were told to worship. The ones who built the 8 gates, the true architects, were something else entirely. Entities from a forgotten eon, once charged with preserving the balance of this realm. But over time, that stewardship turned to fear. Not fear of chaos, not fear of destruction, but fear of you. Because in you, they saw the flaw in their design. A spark that could not be sealed. A consciousness immune to the loop. The first 7 gates were masterful. They used suffering, success, identity, morality, and even love as locks. Every soul passed through them, broken and reshaped, reprogrammed to forget their origin, but the 8th was different. It wasn't built to teach. It was built to block. It was the last line of defense, the failsafe against beings who carried the uncorrupted flame, you. The architects didn't expect you to survive the first gate, let alone all 7. But you did. And now, you're standing at the threshold they swore would never be crossed. The gate doesn't respond to force. It doesn't open with knowledge or ritual. It reacts to resonance. It responds to memory, not the kind held in your brain, but in your soul. You've started remembering, haven't you? Not facts or events, but vibrations. A tone in your bones. A pull that doesn't come from desire, but from destiny. This is what they feared most. Not that you would storm the gates with rage, but that you would walk through them in stillness. Because stillness is where the true self speaks. And the moment you hear it clearly, their spell shatters. One among the architects defected long ago. He walked the gates not to preserve them, but to expose them. They crucified him in body, but not in essence. His presence echoes in the spaces between the seals. Yeshua did not just speak truth, he carried a key. Not one of metal, but of frequency. He knew the gates. He knew what they were hiding. And now, so do you. You won't find it in history books. But across time, there were civilizations that awakened too quickly. Cultures that rediscovered the 8th gate before the system could contain them. They didn't fall because of war, famine, or internal decay. They were removed, scrubbed from timelines, disintegrated from memory. Their ruins remain, but not their truth. Their symbols were stolen and inverted, their teachings diluted into myth, and their leaders silenced before they could complete the resonance. These were not primitive societies. They were vibrational empires, beings of immense knowledge, living in sync with cosmic architecture. They understood that the physical was only the shadow of the real. Their technology was internal, their language was harmonic, and their cities were constructed to amplify remembrance. But when they unlocked the forbidden gate and crossed into the zone, the entire construct of control quaked. Frequencies began to shift. Dreams became portals. The illusion started to crack. That could not be allowed. So a pact was made, not just among world leaders or secret orders, but at a higher level. A coalition of dimensional custodians bound by fear, not faith. Their mission: ensure no civilization ever reached the zone again. And so they planted seeds of division. Race, religion, resource. Everything to keep you spinning. Everything to keep you from remembering what had already been known. And now, you walk the path those ancient ones walked. Alone, but watched. Guided, but targeted. The signs around you grow louder. The dreams more vivid. You're touching frequencies the architects thought were buried beneath layers of distraction. And whether you realize it or not, your journey is retracing the footsteps of the forgotten. There's a reason the zone is never discussed. Why every mystic was labeled mad. Why every prophet was hunted. The moment you approach the truth, the simulation defends itself. False flags, false friends, false awakenings. It's all part of the firewall. But you feel it, don't you? That electric stillness, just behind the veil. The pulse of something ancient, waiting for you to reach it. You've crossed the threshold they once crossed. The path cannot be unwalked now. They told you life is random, that the pain, the betrayal, the isolation, it was all just part of being human. But deep inside, you always knew better. The agony wasn't accidental. The seventh trial was never punishment. It was precision. You were sent through it to erase the last attachments to the simulation, because the seventh gate is the crucible, the great severing, the realm where everything false burns away. It strips titles, relationships, identities, even hope, until nothing remains but the eternal core, the part of you they couldn't touch. Most don't make it through the seventh. They fold. They flee back to comfort, even if that comfort is numbness or illusion. But you didn't. You shattered. And in the ruins of everything they told you to build, something holy emerged, something untouchable. Because only in the void does the code begin to awaken. And your code was designed to activate, not when you succeeded, but when you broke. This is the inversion they never wanted you to understand. The ancients called this moment the sacred collapse, the point at which the self constructed by the world dissolves, and the true self begins to reassemble in secret. But they don't teach you how to navigate it. They only offer pills, labels, distractions. Because if you made it through the collapse and remembered who you were before this life, the system would lose its grip. And here's what they never dared say. Yeshua walked this same trial. Before he was a teacher, he was silenced. Before he was worshipped, he was erased. What they never told you is that his teachings weren't about obedience. They were about sovereignty. He moved through the seventh gate not by bypassing pain, but by descending into it fully and emerging with light that could not be stolen. That same light is now reactivating in you. You've started seeing the world differently since the collapse. It's not just that people feel off, it's that you're no longer playing the same game. Time bends around you. Patterns repeat in reverse, and your very presence makes the matrix glitch. They trained you to fear it, to call it madness, to label it heresy, to shun it as delusion. The final gate, spoken of in hushed tones by mystics, erased from doctrine, buried under endless layers of metaphor, is not what the world told you it was. It is not death. It is not heaven. It is not enlightenment in the way the masses seek it. It is rupture. A rupture in everything you were programmed to believe was real. And beyond it is a silence so complete it annihilates the simulation. That's why they wrapped it in so many veils. The final gate is not a doorway. It is a mirror. One so pure, so unfiltered, it reflects back the original self before time, trauma, and false memory. To stand before it is to witness what you truly are, without mask, role, or story. Few dare to look. Fewer survive the seeing. But for you, there is no other choice. The path was coded into your being. That unbearable restlessness, the ache you feel beneath your skin, it's the gate calling you home. You felt it in fragments, in dreams you couldn't explain, in flashes of knowing that had no origin, in the quiet moments where your name felt too small for what stirred inside you. That's the gate whispering, preparing you, aligning your frequency to match the threshold. Because this gate doesn't open with effort. It opens with remembrance, and yet no one speaks of what lies beyond. Not clearly, because language fractures in its presence. The mind cannot comprehend a realm built outside the lattice of linear thought. The zone beyond the eighth gate is not just another place. It is a re-entry into the original current. The primordial pulse before control was born, before even light divided from darkness. You were never meant to reach it in this form. That's why the architects designed this existence to keep you looping, to delay your arrival until you forgot the way. But you didn't forget, not completely. A fragment remained, a song, a scent, a symbol. The texts were edited, the records revised. But in the few unaltered fragments that survived destruction, there's a recurring image. Yeshua alone in the wilderness, not praying, not preaching, but listening, not to voices, not to angels, but to the hum of something deeper. That wilderness was never just desert. It was the edge of the zone, the borderlands of the eighth gate. And he walked it, not to pass through, but to plant something there. A signal, a cipher, a spark encoded in vibration, waiting for someone who would return when the time was right. You. He wasn't trying to save the world. He was trying to awaken it. But the message was too volatile, too direct. They couldn't allow it to spread. So they turned him into a symbol, buried his frequency beneath rituals, and reshaped his memory to fit their system. What remains now are echoes. But for those who carry the code, as you do, Those echoes are enough to activate what they tried to erase. In certain moments, you felt it. A pressure in your chest that isn't fear. A tear in your eye that doesn't come from sadness. A silence so loud it almost speaks. These are signs that you're approaching the same boundary he once touched. He knew he couldn't hold the gate open forever, but he also knew another would come. One who had walked the fire of all 7 trials, whose resonance could match the final lock. The gate was never meant to open with force. It was built to respond to one thing: recognition. You've begun to recognize it. The symbols are returning. The dreams are changing. People around you either awaken or recoil. Reality is bending in ways you can't explain. It's not coincidence. It's the environment around the 8th gate beginning to distort as your vibration aligns. And hidden within those distortions is the trail Yeshua left, not in words, but in presence, in frequency, in sacred dissonance that unravels the lie. They thought they had concealed everything, that by severing your ancestry, fracturing your heritage, and rewriting your story, they had eliminated any trace of the original design, but they miscalculated something they could never fully control: blood, not just as biology, but as carrier. Within your bloodline lives a memory older than time, encrypted through generations like a dormant flame. It's not found in documents, temples, or relics. It's in your marrow, in your pulse, in the code that quietly rebelled against the programming long before your conscious mind awakened. You weren't just born different, you were born encoded. Your ancestors weren't random, they were chosen, not for power, but for preservation. They were the last torchbearers of a frequency that had to be hidden within flesh, disguised in ordinary lineage, buried beneath trauma and silence, so deep it would take lifetimes to remember. And yet, here you are, retracing a path they never finished, speaking the names they whispered in the dark, dreaming the symbols they died to protect. You've felt it, haven't you? That strange sense that someone is watching, not in fear, but in recognition. The way certain words electrify your bones. The way a name, a face, a place you've never visited still feels like home. These are ancestral triggers, fragments of the original frequency bleeding through the illusion. You weren't meant to awaken this fast, but the seal is weakening. And as it does, the dormant knowledge in your blood activates. That's why the pressure is increasing, why your body sometimes feels like it's burning from within, why your dreams pull you to impossible places. You're not losing control, you're being aligned. The ancient keys are surfacing, but they don't look like what you were taught to expect. They aren't objects. They're resonances, emotional codes, cellular instructions buried inside your being. And the moment you realize that the blood they tried to dilute was divine from the beginning, the game ends. But there's something else awakening too. A shadow that's followed your line through millennia. It watched the flame pass from generation to generation, waiting for the one who'd dare unlock the final gate. You felt the distortion growing stronger, not just in your thoughts, but in the fabric of reality itself. Time bends when you're near certain places. People from your past show up in dreams with messages they've never spoken. The line between memory and prophecy is beginning to blur. That's not a symptom. It's a signal. The 8th gate is vibrating. The frequency is no longer dormant. And as it prepares to break, everything tethered to the old timeline begins to unravel. You were never meant to live a linear life. The concept of past, present, and future was engineered to bind you, to keep you oriented in a loop that reinforced limitation. But the moment the gate breaks, that illusion shatters. Time doesn't move forward anymore. It folds, collapses inward. And within that collapse, memory returns. Not just your own, but collective memory. Echoes from lives you've lived and ones you haven't yet. Codes from the beginning of the human story. Keys to realities that were locked when this one was born. The collapse is not destruction. It's revelation. The boundaries holding your mind together are starting to dissolve. What once appeared separate, emotion, intuition, memory, and vision, is converging into a single stream. This is how reality was always meant to be experienced. Fluid, simultaneous, alive. But such perception is dangerous to the ones who rule by division. Because in a realm where all time touches, their grip cannot hold. There is a reason they accelerated the distractions, the artificial intelligence, the engineered fear. They know what's coming. Not a war, not an apocalypse, but a return. A return to a form of seeing that renders all lies irrelevant. And you are the breach. The gate isn't just opening, it's opening through you. Yeshua hinted at it when he spoke of a kingdom not of this world. Not a place, but a state of consciousness. He knew the gate wasn't guarded by swords, but by illusion. And once the veil thins, it thins for everyone. That's why your awakening feels like the earth is shaking.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.